I'd like to begin with a question. What do we mean when we talk about humanitarian leadership? Although it's often cited as one of the most important factors underpinning performance, there still doesn't seem to be a clear idea of what leadership actually is. Like the infamous judicial decision on obscenity, we only seem to know it when we see it. Now, as part of ALNAP's 25th anniversary, we have looked back at how leadership has been understood in the humanitarian sector and how it works. So let me share with you some of our main reflections. It was about 20 years ago when we humanitarians became explicitly aware of a leadership gap at all levels across the sector. Evaluations on the Haiti earthquake and the Pakistan floods went as far to say that failed responses were actually defined by poor leadership. The dominant idea of leadership at the time was that of the heroic leader, akin to examples derived from military history or successful businesses. Such heroes determined goals and directed resources and actions. And I'm sure all of us will know some of these very impressive leaders that left their mark wherever they worked. But emerging research suggested that this highly individualized model was not always effective in operational contexts, and a slightly more sophisticated understanding emerged. Experience taught us that the most effective kind of leadership was best achieved through distributing leadership amongst the group, sharing the load, and creating a culture of openness and mutual support. The hero had given way to the host. But it wasn't that simple. The heroic leader wouldn't go away, and in some contexts, big personalities were needed to step up and lead from the saddle. One documented example here is Ross Mountain, whom many of us know and admire. Now, Ross was actually holding 4 senior UN positions when he turned around a failing humanitarian response in the Democratic Republic of Congo. For the record, he was humanitarian coordinator, resident coordinator, UNDP rep, and special UN representative to DRC at the time. Importantly, it became apparent that leadership was taking different forms and also operating at different levels. Within international responses, we saw that different business models for action were best determined by leaders who were able to judge prevailing contexts and operational structures. For example, whether the intervention was across a group of agencies with no single line of command, or whether it was an individual agency. For example, collective leadership worked well across organizations in the overall system, and this is described in Here Geneva's report, which you can download from our website, whereas adaptive leadership suited challenges at the level of affected populations. And you can learn more about this in a Konu paper on adaptive leadership. The system had learned there was no single best practice model for leadership, and the best approach hinged on understanding the context, the social, political, institutional barriers, and the specific operational barriers and enablers, and then using that understanding to apply a best fit approach to leadership. So our understanding had developed, but our expectations about what the leaders could deliver was, and still is, very high. Many people still look to leadership to bring about better humanitarian performance through a combination of political motivations, institutional space, and collective action. And every so often, an exceptional individual or group will crop up to do so. But as much as their success is lauded, it also serves to highlight the pervading lack of success elsewhere, as bore out by the State of the System report, which tells us that changes and improvements have been slow, incremental, and largely, but not exclusively, confined to technical areas. And this lack of change is easily attributed to lack of leadership. Now, it appears that the sector habitually locates performance failures in the domain of leadership, and this is unfortunate for everyone. It's unfortunate for leaders who perform these feats of system fixing. It's unfortunate for leaders who don't or can't repeat their successes and are doomed to operate in their shadows. And it's unfortunate also for the system as a whole, because it sets up most leaders to fail, as only the most extraordinary individuals can succeed. And this means that systemic failures tend to be located within those leaders who are perceived to be not fixing the system, rather than in the lack of genuine structural change. What we're seeing now are more efforts to strengthen individual leadership capabilities, which is good and has its place, but not enough to embed leadership within the institutional architecture and within the way the sector operates. Now, at this point, it's important to say that to a great extent, we have a good idea of how we want to change the system and what it would look like. And there are three important elements here. We need to better adapt different business models to suit the operational context. We need strong collective action, and we need more flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances on the ground. And although we are seeing ad hoc improvements and some encouraging signs in all three areas, it's still widely perceived that the system is stuck in a kind of functioning inertia and deeper changes are not happening. And there are many good reasons for this. For example, organizational resistance to change and giving up control. This may involve giving up control and letting local leaders step in, as described in the paper written by the Centre for Humanitarian Action. You see the link on our website again. We also see that current incentives tend to reward compliance rather than risk-taking. Incentives are also premised on rigid procedures and financial targets and unhelpful power dynamics. There are many others, all of which need to be reconfigured to release the straps on the straitjackets that many of our leaders are forced to wear today. Now, currently, we have a situation where individual leaders often have to go against the grain of the prevailing organizational culture to do the right thing for affected people. And this is vividly described in the paper on courage by the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation and in relation to protection, as shown in the HPG paper. So many of the improvements we're seeing are despite the prevailing organizational system-wide culture, not because of it. And there's been a tendency to rely on such individuals rather than embed their approaches and ways of working into business as usual. Our conclusion, therefore, is that organizations and the system itself have to move towards creating a stronger enabling environment for institutionalizing the kind of leadership that is encouraged and rewarded for tackling the barriers to change and improve performance.